We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, continued to be joined by Dave Patterson, Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, and I remain your host, Mark Angelides. Now, Dave, I want to move the discussion to another part of the world, and that is China. So there's recent prognostications or analyses maybe out of the Atlantic Council Global China Hub, and that is Elizabeth Freund Lazarus. And she was talking about how there's obviously China trying to blockade Taiwan may just be more of a smokescreen. And what's really happening is that these are designed to test how, if China took Taiwan or tried to take Taiwan, how the U.S. response would be, and how China would then be able to retaliate directly with the upper hand against any U.S. action in the region.
Well, I think that when you start to break that down, what you find is that there's more than just the People's Liberation Army, Navy, People's Liberation Army, Air Force doing exercises around Taiwan. In recent months, there has been a number of exercises with Russia and China in a combined exercise in the Sea of Japan and in the waterways adjacent to Alaska that have been extensive, larger than they've ever been before. And then you had this recent 13-hour practice of a blockade, but you've had several of those, not the least of which was the Chinese reaction to then Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And what this would appear to be is, first of all, a legitimate practice on how they would blockade Taiwan, and to see what the reaction would be as well, but also to see how stretched the United States Navy and the United States military would be by having these exercises in the different places around the Indo-Pacific.
There's something very specific that, and it was a gentleman on Fox News, Dr. Chang, and I've actually written down his quote here. He says that the real target is the United States, and the quote, "They were using a very old Chinese strategy called encircling the point, striking the reinforcement." Dr. Chang here, he says it's an old Chinese strategy, but I would suggest that it's much older and goes back to Themistocles and the Battle of Salamis, where, for our listeners who aren't familiar with this, I know Dave is, we've discussed this quite a bit. What happened was Themistocles, who first convinced Athens that it needed to build up its navy in response to, I guess it was the attack on Marathon 10 years before with, I believe that was Darius, and then his son Xerxes builds this huge army and starts coming down, which is where we have the hot gates at Thermopylae as well. That was contemporaneous with that. And anyway, Themistocles convinced Athens to build this huge navy so it could actually fight against the incoming Xerxes, which he was convinced was going to happen, and he was right. But then Xerxes' navy, so he saved it with that. But then, of course, the land army kept coming around, and everybody had to escape from Athens. So they decided, well, let's go to Salamis. So they used their navy to get people across. But Xerxes wanted his navy to go in and attack the fleet, but it was a bit too even, and it looked a bit. And this is where it comes back to the thing. Sorry, I've been going on a bit here. It looked a bit too even, but then Themistocles went to Xerxes and basically said, they've ostracized me. They've got no love for me. Here, I'll suggest to them that what they do is they send half of their fleet around the island, and that will take them like 1 or 2 days, and then you can go and attack the one half, and then when the other one, you can come and get it. And so anyway, Xerxes for some reason agreed to this, but he didn't know that the island is very, very small and it only takes a very short time. And so while they were chasing the other half around the island, They destroyed the half that was still there and then waited for the other half to come around, completely reversed it. And this seems to me to be encircling the point, striking the reinforcement. What do you make of that? Sorry to go on so long with that.
I think I think there's some relevance to what you say. Themistocles had in mind to take out the Persian navy all along, but realized 10 years before that they had no navy. And what he did that was so remarkable was to convince Athens that they needed these trimarines, and they needed them in such numbers that it would stretch the budget. You know, if it all sounds familiar, nothing changes, right? There's nothing new under the sun, as long as we're talking about ancient
Ecclesiastes. Yep.
Yeah, right. But so he convinced them, and they immediately started this huge building program for trimarines. And so when Themistocles took his fleet not around the island, and he never stopped, he just kept going around. They sort of followed him. They broke up their forces, sort of followed him, and he came back and, began sinking their ships. And so I see the lesson was that Themistocles knew that he was going to have a problem in a decade.
Yeah.
And that was his value, to be able to perceive this threat. Not unlike our experience today. We see the threat. And the United States particularly is not entering this circumstance in a way where nothing is sacred. You go after them. You have to start building stuff. It's not clear to me that drones are the answer, but that's where apparently the Biden and Harris administration are clever to go in terms of the next shiny thing. But whatever it is, we need to be able to build quickly. China is testing the capability of the United States to respond, and how stretched can the U.S. be and still be formidable. So far, we haven't paid much attention to their threats about the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, and have said like rave on. But the fact is that you start to look at what they're doing in terms of Taiwan and the practice of the blockade. If they put in a substantial blockade of Taiwan, would the United States and our allies have the will? We probably have the capability, but do we have the will to test the blockade and run the blockade? And remember, they're looking at a sea-based blockade. They might want to consider what we did in Berlin after World War II, when Berlin was isolated. We have substantial airlift capability and could bring in by air. And we also have, that's one of the best values of our carrier task force and carrier battle groups, is that we can put combat air patrol to protect those inbound airlift aircraft and air mobility aircraft, which incidentally we don't have as many as we should, but that's a different program.
Lessons from history, from Themistocles, and from Dave Patterson. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always happy to be with you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Lisa K. Donner and Dave Patterson, for taking the time to join us. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners at home, for being here. And remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation. And this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.